I don't understand. It won't open. The lock has been changed. Mama, can I come in?
People always say funerals feel unreal. I never understood that until I stood beside my husband's grave and realized the world had continued moving without asking permission. The sky was pale and overcast, the kind of quiet afternoon that seemed wrong for something so final. A cold wind moved through the rows of trees surrounding the cemetery at the edge of the city, carrying soft conversations and the distant sound of traffic that somehow made everything feel even lonelier. Family members stood in small groups at first. Then slowly, they started leaving. One hug, one quiet apology, one final take care of yourself. Until there was almost nobody left. But before we continue, if stories like this speak to you, take a second to support the channel. Like this video, subscribe, and share it with someone who believes healing sometimes begins after heartbreak. And tell me in the comments, what would you do if the place you called home suddenly stopped feeling like home? Now back to the story. I remained standing, hands folded in front of me, still wearing the black coat I had put on that morning as if choosing clothes mattered anymore. A framed photograph of my husband rested beside fresh white flowers. His smile in that picture looked careless and alive. Too alive. My eyes stayed fixed on it. 3 weeks earlier, we had been arguing over paint colors for a future house. 2 weeks earlier, we had talked about taking a trip we kept postponing. 1 week earlier, he had promised me, next year will be easier. There would never be a next year. Someone touched my shoulder. An older relative whispered softly, "You shouldn't stay alone." I nodded even though I barely heard them. When they walked away, silence returned. I reached into my coat pocket and felt my phone vibrate. One new message. From Mom. "Come home. Get some rest." I stared at the screen for a long moment. Home. For the first time all day, that word didn't feel comforting. But I had nowhere else to go. So I picked up my bag, looked at the grave one last time, and started walking toward the car. Home no longer felt like home by the time I reached my parents' house. The city had already gone quiet. Streetlights cast long yellow shadows across the empty road, and the cold evening air carried the smell of damp pavement and distant rain. I parked slowly and sat in the car for a moment with both hands resting on the steering wheel. I still held the funeral flowers. White lilies. Flowers meant for endings. On the passenger seat beside me was a small overnight bag. Nothing dramatic. Just enough clothes for a few days. I wasn't planning to stay forever. I only wanted somewhere familiar. Somewhere I didn't have to explain why I looked empty. The porch light was on. That small detail made me breathe easier. Mom knew I was coming. I climbed the steps, adjusted the flowers in my arms, and reached for my key. The metal slipped into the lock, but it stopped. I frowned and tried again. Nothing. I pulled it out and looked at it. Wrong angle? Too tired? I tried a third time. Still nothing. A strange feeling settled in my chest. I knocked once. No answer. Then again. And again. Finally, footsteps. The door opened just enough for my mother to appear. She looked at me, then immediately looked away. Her expression wasn't sadness. It wasn't concern. It looked like discomfort. "Mom." She forced a small smile. "Oh, you're here." Ist her. Then my eyes drifted downward. The lock. Bright. New. Not scratched. Not the old brass one I had used my entire life. For a second, my brain refused to understand. I looked back at her. "Why did you change the lock?" She opened the door slightly wider but didn't answer. Behind her, deeper inside the house, I heard movement. And suddenly, something felt very wrong. I stepped inside slowly. The house smelled exactly the same. Laundry detergent. Old wooden furniture. Something warm left in the kitchen. For 1 second, I thought maybe I had misunderstood. Maybe the lock had broken. Maybe there was an explanation. Mom quietly closed the door behind me. Dad appeared from the living room but didn't come closer. No one hugged me. No one asked how I was holding up. I stood there still carrying funeral flowers. Then I heard laughter. Soft. Familiar. Coming from upstairs. I turned toward the hallway. Mom immediately spoke. "You don't need to go up." I looked at her. What do you mean? She hesitated. Dad answered instead. We made some changes. My stomach tightened. I walked upstairs anyway. Each step felt heavier than the last. When I reached my room, I stopped. My room no longer existed. The pale walls had been repainted. The shelves were rearranged. My photographs were gone. My books were missing. My clothes, folded into brown boxes stacked neatly against the wall. And sitting cross-legged on my bed, my younger sister, wearing headphones, scrolling on her phone. She looked up casually. Oh, you're back. Back. Like I had returned from a trip, not a funeral. I stared around the room. My room. The room I grew up in. The room I cried in after my first heartbreak. The room I slept in the night before my wedding. Gone. Mom finally said quietly, "Well, you were married." Dad nodded. "You had another life." My sister shrugged. And I needed more space. I turned slowly. My voice came out smaller than I expected. "I buried my husband today." Silence. Then Dad said, "We didn't think you'd be staying." I looked at all those boxes. And suddenly, this didn't feel new. It felt familiar. Too familiar. I stood in the doorway staring at the boxes. And suddenly, the room disappeared. Not physically, but in my mind. Because standing there, looking at everything packed away so neatly, I realized something I should have understood years ago. This wasn't sudden. This wasn't about a room. It had always been this way. Memories started arriving quietly. Small moments. The kind you never question when they happen. I remembered being 10 years old, sitting at the kitchen table after winning a school competition. I had carried the certificate home carefully, so it wouldn't crease. Mom smiled and said, "That's nice." Then my sister walked in crying, because she didn't get selected. Immediately everyone turned to comfort her. Dad looked at me and said, "You're stronger. Let her have today." So I folded the certificate and put it away. I remembered birthdays. If she wanted my decorations, we changed them. If she wanted my plans, we adjusted them. If she forgot responsibilities, I covered for her. There was always a reason. She's sensitive. She needs encouragement. She'll feel left out. And somehow I became the one expected to understand, even when understanding hurt. Then another memory surfaced. The night before my wedding, Mom standing in my room saying, "Well, this won't really be yours anymore." At the time I thought she meant I was starting a new life. Now I wondered, had they already decided I was temporary? My eyes moved back to the stacked boxes. Every achievement, every memory, packed neatly out of sight. Not because I stopped belonging, but because I had always been expected to make space. I looked at my parents downstairs. For the first time, I stopped feeling shocked and started feeling clear. Nobody spoke. The house stayed strangely quiet. Downstairs, I could hear the ticking of the old clock in the hallway. The same clock that had marked birthdays, family dinners, and ordinary evenings that now felt like someone else's memories. I looked at the boxes stacked against the wall. My life. Folded. Labeled. Stored. Like someone had been preparing for my absence long before today. My sister took off one headphone and looked at me. "You can leave these here for now if you want." If I want. I almost laughed. Instead, I bent down and picked up the first box. Mom appeared in the doorway. "What are you doing?" I lifted another one, taking my things. Her face tightened with confusion more than concern. "Oh, don't be dramatic." Dad crossed his arms. "You're emotional right now. Stay a few days. You'll calm down." That sentence stopped me. Not because it hurt, because suddenly I understood. They thought this was temporary. They thought I would cry, accept it, adjust as always. Like every other time. I carried the boxes downstairs. One trip. Then another. No one offered to help. No one stopped me. Outside, the night air felt colder now. The street was empty except for my car under the porch light. I placed the last box inside and closed the trunk. Then I turned back. Mom stood at the doorway. Dad behind her. My sister visible upstairs. I looked at all of them, and calmly said, "You locked me out long before today." My eyes moved to the new lock. "You just changed the door last." No one answered. I got into the car, started the engine, and for the first time since the funeral, I drove somewhere without knowing where home was. The apartment wasn't much. One small bedroom, thin walls, a narrow kitchen with cabinets that didn't close properly. The window overlooked a parking lot and a row of tired-looking trees that moved in the wind like they had nowhere else to be. But when I unlocked that door for the first time, it opened. No hesitation. No replacement look. No waiting to be allowed in. I carried in my boxes one at a time. There was no furniture except a folding table and an old sofa the landlord had left behind. I placed my husband's framed photograph on the kitchen counter because I didn't know where else to put it. Then I sat on the floor and cried. Not loudly, not dramatically, just quietly. For him, for myself, for the version of life that no longer existed. The next morning I woke up because sunlight hit my face. There was no one telling me what to do. No expectations. Only silence. So I started small. I unpacked one box, made coffee, updated my resume, found temporary work. Days turned into routines. Morning walks, laundry, answering emails, cooking simple meals. Some evenings I still spoke to his photograph. I did one thing today. And somehow that became enough. Weeks passed. Then one Saturday morning, I found an old notebook. Inside was a list we had written together. Places to visit, books to read, things we kept postponing. At the bottom he had written, "Stop waiting for life to begin." I smiled for the first time in months. And slowly, I started keeping promises that neither of us got enough time to finish. Months passed. Not all at once. Not dramatically. Just one ordinary day after another. By autumn, the trees outside my apartment had changed color. The mornings felt colder, and my routines no longer felt temporary. Work became familiar. The apartment slowly filled with things that belonged to me. A lamp, 2 plants, books stacked beside the sofa. Not a perfect life, but a real one. That evening I was making dinner when my phone rang. Mom. I stared at the screen. For a second, I thought about letting it ring out. But I answered. Hello. There was silence. Then her voice. Soft. Careful. How are you? I almost smiled. Months ago, that question would have broken me. Now it simply felt late. I'm okay. Another pause. Then she said it. Your sister moved out. I waited. Mom continued quietly. The room is empty again. Something inside me became very still. Dad's voice appeared in the background. Come home. Not angry. Not demanding. Just unfamiliar. Mom spoke again. We made mistakes. I leaned against the kitchen counter. Part of me wanted to say yes. Part of me remembered birthday candles, packed boxes, changed locks, and standing in funeral clothes holding flowers no one noticed. I looked around my apartment. The uneven shelves. The warm light. The photograph smiling from the corner. And suddenly I understood something. I had spent years believing belonging had to be given to me. But peace had arrived the moment I stopped asking for permission. I took a slow breath. Then I said gently, I'm not angry anymore. Silence. But I already came home. And for the first time, I meant it. Winter arrived quietly, not with dramatic storms. Just colder mornings, longer evenings, and the kind of silence that no longer felt empty. The apartment looked different now. The folding table was gone. There was a bookshelf against the wall. Curtains by the window. A soft blanket folded neatly over the sofa. Small things. But every object had been chosen. Not inherited. Not assigned. Chosen. Late that afternoon, pale sunlight stretched across the wooden floor as I opened one final box that had remained unopened for months. Inside were photographs, old receipts, a notebook, and the framed picture from our last trip together. He was smiling at the camera. I wasn't. I remembered that day. He had laughed and said, "One day you'll stop worrying and just live." At the time, I rolled my eyes. Now I understood. I carried the frame across the apartment and placed it carefully on the shelf. Not hidden. Not like a memory I needed to escape. But not in the center either. because grief was no longer the whole room, just part of it. I stepped back, looked around, then looked at him. For a moment, I imagined him standing there, hands in his pockets, smiling like he already knew. I took a slow breath and spoke softly. You were supposed to be here for this. The room stayed quiet, but somehow it didn't feel lonely. I turned toward the window and looked out at the city lights. Then I said, losing him broke me. A pause. Losing their approval set me free. And for the first time in a very long time, I wasn't surviving. I was home. Fade out.